Okay, pals, let's dive into Hillocks starting with the preface. Note, though, that here I kind of revise his title because although comp gal Andrea Lunsford famously asserted everything's an argument, I am less contentious because I believe we should wag more and bark less. I say everything is about meaning-making. Reading Hillocks' preface, I have decided that maybe we should not call students students. I think we should call them citizens of a democracy, or maybe future citizens, or citizens in training. And among the requisite skills for citizenship are these: the ability to make meaning from the texts that come our way, and the ability to make meaning through the texts we create. Hillocks' aim and ours in this class is to prepare our student citizens to do what the Common Core standards indicate they must, both as the targets of and the creators of arguments or meaning-making texts. In this role, they must read, write, and thus think critically. For Hillocks, this means the ability to delineate and evaluate an argument and its claims, evaluate the validity of reasoning, and evaluate the relevance and the sufficiency of evidence. As you can see in this slide, Hillocks kind of revises the traditional claim data warrant model. In the process of crafting an argument, his model begins with data. Not that his data replaces the data that supports a claim, it's still there, under claim and above warrant. But he rightly notes that claims don't come out of thin air. Well, stupid claims do. For example, you say to a student that he has to argue something. What, he'll ask? Something that interests you, you'll respond. But you know the bullshit you'll get from that advice, because after all, what interests a middle school or high school person never ceases to amaze me. Anyway, as Hillocks explains it, the data refers to the materials that lead students to a question of interest, and this is going to be key. And this process is a little bit easier with literature because novels and stories and poems present all manner of questions. But in a strictly writing class where the task is an argumentative essay, identifying a question that leads to a meaningful claim can be a real challenge. Let me use myself as an example. In trying to find a dissertation topic, I was really struggling. I was teaching an American literature survey course using one of those big-ass anthologies. The editor was this guy named McMichael, and his version was tons better than the Norton, but that's another story. Anyway, in the header notes to all these writers from the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s, I kept reading about people going to Mexico. Hart Crane went, Catherine Ann Porter went, Langston Hughes went. And from my days as an undergrad, I remembered that D.H. Lawrence went. So did Huxley. Yes, that is the same Huxley that you read in high school. They all went to Mexico, not Paris. So I wondered why. I was curious. So I started reading around the topic, and the result was my dissertation, titled Paris South, What a Lost Generation Sought and Found in Revolutionary Mexico. My claim, the thesis of my 300-plus page paper, came later. However, much of the data from my initial inquiry into why found its way into the final project. Now, a claim is the result of inquiry. I sometimes think that nowadays it's not so much that everything's an argument, it's that everything's a claim. The problem is that increasingly we live in a world of unsubstantiated claims. If you doubt that, think back to last year in the presidential election. Choose your side. People say anything and we buy it. Think about the Hillocks discussion of student responses on standardized tests. That might be one reason, he argues, that we live in a world full of claims without substance. The morons who write the tests don't know shit, and the teachers who teach to the test, they don't know shit either. As a result, the claims that are accepted as valid are actually unsubstantiated. They have no warrant. See, I think you need to make part of your teacher talk repertoire the classic Three Stooges routine. And as un-PC as the Stoogers are, I love them anyway. So picture this, Larry. Oh yeah, says who? Mo. Says me, that's who. Cue violent beating of Larry and Curly just because Mo feels like. As this slide illustrates, I happen to concur with TOULMIN that inquiry is key to argument. And questioning is, as my dissertation example illustrated, how I teach identifying a thesis or a claim. I begin from the idea that the thesis is the answer to a question one poses about a topic. So we start from the subject. Math, science, history, English, whatever. The topic is set by the teacher or the school's curriculum. For example, think about those huge textbooks they have for each grade level in English language arts. I used them last year for a bunch of professional developments I did here in District 6. Anyway, one of the units we looked at was on the topic, the American Dream. It had the Emma Lazarus poem, Bring Me Your Tired, You're Hungry, yada yada, and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, of course. So that's the topic, right? The topic is the American Dream. The subject was English. Now the question. Too often teachers come up with those. They hand students a question to answer, but not we. We are the teachers who say to kids, okay, you've been reading all these texts, looking at all these pictures, listening to speeches. What questions do you have that you might want to look into? What is unanswered for you? Here's where the student's marginalia or judiciously used sticky notes or smaller assignments throughout the unit can help them locate a question that interests them based on all the data they've been reading. And as they start to noodle on their questions, well, here comes the working thesis. So in the example of the American Dream, students have read a whole lot of their evidence already. So that's the data in the data claim data model that Hillocks is talking about. Look again at the first full paragraph on page XXI, which I think is 1022, and the 5 steps on the bottom of that page. It's all about the data. But here's the challenge. Students better be interested in that data or it will be a long-ass assignment. If students don't give a shit about the data, which is the heart of their writing, well, they're sure as shit not going to care about the work they produce. Let's think about that. I want you to stop this minute and go to the blog on Blackboard titled Data and post in response to the question I put there. Now, before you go on, go. Don't stop, go do that. I'll wait. Teasing a claim from data is a challenge, but that's not even the hard part. That's where most students stop, which is why they don't argue anything. They just says stuff. I love the Stooges. Well, teachers love cute little mnemonic devices. Barf. Barf, I hate them. I had a student tell me about P. Yes, ha ha, that P. Point, evidence, explain. Get it? P-E-E. Yeah, reduce writing to some scatological mnemonic. Don't forget the P. Really? Adult teachers think that's funny? I'm sure 7th grade boys do. Anyway, focus. Teachers might tell their students to explain, but what counts as explanation amounts to, says me, or says the evidence I just gave you. No, you get a Mo head bonk. We have got to teach warrant. It's the heart of argument. It is the heart of making meaning. Now, long before this Hillocks book, I used Law and Order to explain warrants. I love Law and Order. And I love the scenes when Lenny or Ray or Lupo slap the warrant against the suspect's chest and barge into his or her home to find the .22 or the blood-spattered blouse. The point is, the warrant allows for the collection of evidence that will support the theory of the crime. It must make the connection between the evidence and the theory of the crime clear. Think about the example Hillocks uses from his own class, the murder scene. This is a lesson plan, waiting to be written, by the way. Anyway, his last line in the paragraph that ends on XXIV, which is 24, is key. He tells us that his student offered statements of evidence, i.e. facts, and a warrant, i.e. an explanation based on those facts, that the class could accept. That is, they accepted his theory of the crime, his thesis. Colonel Mustard in the library with the rope. Now, as we'll see, in thinking about writing occasions, we must consider our purpose. In this vein, Hillocks translates Aristotle's forensic, epideitic, and deliberative purposes into arguments of fact, judgment, and policy. I mention those here because whether or the degree of backing depends on the purpose of the argument. The more complicated the evidence and the more squishy the warrant, the more you might need backing, not for the claims, but to support the warrant. If you look at the diagram on page XIX, which is 19, and frankly, that diagram confuses the crap out of me, the one thing I do get is the backing supporting the reasoning behind the warrant. I think this textbook places backing as less of an issue in arguments of fact and even judgment. But for policy, they are central. Does that make sense, or did I just confuse you? No, I think it makes sense. Our last element in the model is qualification, or rebuttal, or maybe both. And here we are, as Hillocks describes, kind of hedging our bets. See, once upon a time, things were sure as shit. Then came postmodernism, or maybe modernism, or one of those isms. Anyway, and I guess there are still some things that are sure as shit, but why take a chance? Thus, like Hillocks, I embrace the hedge. To hedge is to acknowledge that argument is about probability, and to qualify is to be realistic. There is some stuff that we can't know for 100% sure. In instances where statistics are your data, maybe it's okay to be sure as shit. That said, even then I remain a skeptic. Consider this example from education research. Say some teacher researcher in Cherry Creek does research on a class of students. Heck, let's say 5 classes. And he's got 200 high school juniors total. And he does all this research on them, and he arrives at some conclusion about teaching anything, you name the content. And from that research, he extrapolates a curriculum for teaching that topic. He has data, right? He has numbers, he has figures, he has pre- and post-test stuff. But see, if I am pitching his methodology to my principal in a high school in rural Mississippi, I plan to hedge my bets about the potential success of this public research based on the work of a teacher in Cherry Creek, Colorado. It will, I would explain to the teacher, very likely work with my students in Biloxi. In addition, what students need to realize with rebuttal is that the act of preempting a counter-argument lends credibility and ethos to them and to their arguments. In written text, this is especially important. Here's how I see it. My written work is me on the page, and if my reader has a question, I'm not there to offer an answer or an explanation, and that's kind of annoying for a reader. So part of my job is to imagine or anticipate questions my readers might have, to anticipate their counter-argument and address it. That's a challenge, arguing the other side, and it is one of the places where peer review can be really helpful. So these are the elements of an argument that students need to understand. These steps: the claim, the data, the warrant, the backing, the qualifications and rebuttals, and if you're Hillocks, the data that comes before the first claim. These are the elements they must master. And although it smacks of a prescription, I want to say 2 things about that. First, prescription is not a bad thing, especially for students who struggle with writing who are scared by it. There is comfort in familiarity and in order, and this model provides that. And second, we're going to talk a bunch this semester about differentiation and modification. Well, allowing those students who have mastered the model to mess with it a bit is an opportunity for differentiation. Truthfully, I hope all students stick with the model. I do in all I write, and I encourage my students to do that. If you look at my emails, for example, this format is almost second nature to me. See, I think when the format and the structure are rote, when following them is automatic, then writers can focus on their ideas, and creating texts is about sharing ideas. That's what I value in the work students submit. That's why I separate out content in my rubric. And when how to put ideas together is not a focus, well then the content of those ideas can be the focus.